The alarms blared like a banshee with a hangover, and Vesper Quill couldn't help but grimace. Not from the noise, she'd grown used to that, but from the overwhelming stench of failure that seemed to permeate every corner of the control room. She flicked a switch, killing the noise, and leaned back in her chair, rolling her eyes at the ceiling. Ah, the sweet symphony of warlords screwing up. Music to my ears, she muttered. Across the cluttered room, filled with screens showing more static than security feed, Brack's needlepoint looked up from his terminal, a permanent smirk etched on his face, like he was the only one in on a cosmic joke. Think they'll be any smarter today, Ves? Smarter, Vesper snorted. I'd settle for less homicidally stupid. But it's unlikely. Brax leaned back, kicking his feet onto the console, heedless of the blinking lights beneath his boots. Maybe this time they'll accidentally blow up each other's ships instead of ours. Hope springs eternal, Brax, Vesper said dryly. But let's face it, their brains are as scrambled as a Martian breakfast. The Dyson Swarm, a vast collection of habitats and stations orbiting the gas giant New Helios, was home to a colorful tapestry of warlords. A tapestry stitched with equal parts incompetence and psychopathy. Each thought they were the big fish in a very small pond, unaware that they were all just minnows swimming in Zithran waters. The Zithran Empire was expanding. Like a bad smell or an unpaid bar tab, they were impossible to ignore. And they were headed straight for the Dyson Swarm, ready to swallow it whole. Vesper had gathered the best strategists she could find, a term used loosely here, as best on the Dyson Swarm was like being the tallest dwarf. Nonetheless, they were uniquely human in their creativity, a trait she hoped would give them an edge against the Zithrans. Any sign of our beloved neighbors in their oversized tin cans? Vesper asked, gesturing at the screens. Brax tapped a few buttons, squinting at the readouts like they owed him money. Nothing yet, but give it time. Those wannabe despots are like mold. They always come creeping back when you least want them. Word is the Zithrans are packing enough firepower to make any resistance look like a toddler's tantrum, Vesper said, her voice laced with sarcasm. But hey, maybe we can bore them to death with our infighting. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Zara Riggs, a wiry woman with a permanent scowl and a penchant for stating the obvious. Got your message, she said, her voice flat as expired cola. Hope you've got a plan, cause rumor has it the Zithrans are about as friendly as a rabid space weasel. Oh, I've got a plan, Vesper replied, her smile more of a baring of teeth. It's brilliant, foolproof, and guaranteed to get us killed. Brax laughed, a sharp bark that echoed in the room. Ah, the Vesper Quill guarantee. Nice to see some things never change. Zara rolled her eyes, dropping into a chair with all the grace of a collapsing star. So, what's the actual plan? Get drunk and hope the Zithrans take pity on us. Close, Vesper said, leaning forward, her eyes alight with the kind of mischief that usually preceded explosions. We're going to use our greatest weapon, our stunning good looks, Brax offered. Our unparalleled wit, Zara added. Even better, Vesper said, her voice dripping with irony. Memes. The room fell silent save for the hum of the machinery and the distant sounds of the warlords prepping for their next mutually assured destruction. You've lost it, Zara stated flatly. The pressure's finally cracked your skull. Hear me out, Vesper insisted, her grin widening. The Zithrans have no sense of humor. None. Zip nada, it's all about control, discipline, following orders. We flood their networks with memes, jokes, irreverence. It'll confuse them, disrupt their chain of command, make them question their orders. Brax scratched his chin, thoughtful. You think a bit of humor might throw them off their game? Think about it, Vesper urged. They're uptight to the point of snapping. We give them a little dose of chaos, they won't know what hit them. Zara looked skeptical, but there was a hint of interest in her eyes. And if it fails, then we die laughing, Vesper said with a shrug. Could be worse. Can't argue with that, Brax said, chuckling. Better to go out with a bang and a punchline. They all knew it was a long shot, but what choice did they have? The Zithrans were coming, and the warlords were too busy measuring themselves against each other to notice the real threat. It was up to them to make the first move, and damn the consequences. As the strategists settled into their roles, Vesper felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this crazy plan could work. After all, humans had always been good at one thing, turning the impossible into the merely improbable. "Spread the word," Vesper said, determination in her voice. "Time to give the Zithrans a taste of human ingenuity." Brax saluted mockingly, heading to the comms station. "Let's see if laughter really is the best medicine, or at least the best weapon." Zara lingered a moment, watching Vesper with a mix of amusement and respect. "You really think this is going to work?" "I think," Vesper replied, her tone serious for once, "that we don't have any other choice, and if we're going to go down, we might as well go down swinging." With that, Zara nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "All right, let's meme the hell out of them." As they set to work, crafting messages designed to bewilder and bemuse, Vesper allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Maybe they couldn't save the swarm, but they could at least make the Zithrans' victory a little less clean, a little less assured. Because at the end of the day, humans weren't just fighters. They were survivors, and they'd be damned if they went down without a fight. And if that fight happened to involve an army of jokes and sarcastic comments, well, all the better. In the gloomy, cluttered confines of the control room, a light flashed on a console. Vesper glanced at it, recognizing the pattern. The Zithrans were here. "Showtime," she murmured, a wicked grin curling her lips. Brax and Zara joined her, eyes fixed on the screens. The first wave of memes had been launched, infiltrating the Zithran networks like a tide of irreverent chaos. "Any response yet?" Zara asked, her voice tinged with anticipation. Brax checked his console, his eyes widening. "Well, this is interesting," he said, trying to suppress a laugh. They're shutting down comms, trying to isolate the ships from each other." Vesper clapped her hands, feeling a rush of triumph. "They're panicking. Beautiful." Zara sat back, clearly impressed despite herself. "I can't believe it's actually working." "Never underestimate the power of human stupidity," Vesper said, smirking. "Or rather, the power of making others look stupid." They watched as the Zithran fleet, pride of their empire, descended into chaos. Orders were countermanded, ships veered off course, and confusion reigned supreme. "If we survive this," Brax said, shaking his head in disbelief, "I might just start believing in miracles." Vesper grinned, feeling a rare sense of camaraderie in their shared madness. "Here's to miracles, then, and to pissing off an empire." As the Dyson swarm rallied, inspired by the newfound chaos among their enemies, Vesper knew the fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't dared to in years: hope. With a final glance at the screens, she turned to her team. "Let's keep them guessing," she said, her voice filled with defiance and determination, "and show them what humans are really made of." The battle was just beginning, but Vesper Quill was ready. And if the Zithrans thought they could steamroll over a bunch of humans armed with memes and madness, well, they were in for a very rude awakening. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning the universe's expectations on their head, and doing it with style. The control room was a mess of activity, but Vesper couldn't have cared less. She was in the eye of the storm, orchestrating chaos with the deftness of a conductor leading a symphony of destruction, and it was beautiful in its own way. Like a car crash you couldn't help but watch. "Jack's core, you're up," Vesper called out, her voice slicing through the pandemonium like a knife through synthetic butter. Jack's core, the newest addition to their ragtag band of misfits, was a self-proclaimed memetician. What that actually meant was anyone's guess, but Vesper was willing to bet it involved a lot of lounging in the digital gutters of the galaxy, picking out the choicest pieces of cultural detritus. "Let's see what garbage we can fling at the Zithrans and make it stick," Jack said, his fingers dancing over the console with the grace of a caffeinated spider. Lines of code and flashing images blinked on the screen, promising mayhem with every pixel. Brax sauntered over, a grin plastered on his face. "So, you reckon we can make them laugh themselves to death?" he asked, peering at the memes being crafted. "That's the idea," Jax replied, "but it's more about confusion. You know what they say about a confused enemy?" Vesper interjected, "No, but I bet it's something along the lines of they'll probably shoot themselves in the foot." "Close enough," Jax said with a shrug. "I dug into some intercepted Zithran communications and found something interesting. Turns out their society is as tightly wound as a clockwork duck. Subliminal messaging isn't just a concern for them, it's like their kryptonite." Brax leaned in, clearly interested. "So we hit them with memes stuffed with subliminal chaos." "Exactly," Jax affirmed, flashing a smile that was more mischief than mirth. "We send their rigid little brains spiraling into anarchy." Vesper clapped Jax on the shoulder in what she hoped was a gesture of encouragement. "Well, get to it then. Time to weaponize the internet." Jax nodded, diving back into his console as Sable Dane, the bioengineer with a penchant for irreverence and a mind as sharp as her tongue, strolled into the room. "I hear we're giving the Zithrans a taste of their own medicine," Sable said, her voice a cocktail of sarcasm and curiosity. "We're going to shove a spoonful of chaos down their throats," Vesper confirmed, "and hope they choke on it." Sable chuckled, a sound like broken glass being swept up. "Sounds like a proper Saturday night." Vesper grinned. "Welcome to the party. Grab a drink, find a seat, and enjoy the show." Zithrans are up next in our comedy club. Brax was already loading up the latest batch of memes, each one a carefully crafted piece of confusion ready to be unleashed. "Think they'll get the jokes?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. "Probably not," Sable chimed in. "But then again, if they did, they wouldn't be Zithrans." Jax added a final touch and hit the send command, launching their digital Trojan horse straight into the Zithran networks. "Phase 2 is a go. Let's see how they like being the punchline." The room held its collective breath, watching the screens for any sign of reaction. Time stretched, silence became tangible, and then Brax let out a low whistle as reports started flooding in. "Look at that. They're scrambling like ants at a picnic." Vesper leaned in, eyes narrowing with satisfaction. "Looks like they've found the sugar." The Zithran fleet, a bastion of order and precision, was now displaying all the coordination of a drunk trying to walk a tightrope. Ships were veering off course, commands were garbled, and somewhere, somehow, a Zithran officer was probably having a very bad day. Sable's eyes sparkled with mirth. "Seems like they're experiencing some technical difficulties." Vesper allowed herself a moment of triumph. "All part of the service, folks. Let's keep the pressure on." The control room buzzed with a frenetic energy as the implications of their actions began to sink in. Vesper noted the way her crew was working, less like a collection of misfits and more like a unit. It was almost enough to make her feel sentimental if she were the type for that sort of thing, which she wasn't. Brax wiped a bit of imaginary dust off his console. "So, what's next on the hit parade, boss?" Vesper pondered for a moment. "We keep the memes flowing, ramp up the subliminal chaos, make them so confused they can't tell their left thruster from their right." Sable leaned back, an eyebrow raised. "And if they catch on?" "Figure out what we're doing. Then we improvise," Vesper replied, as if it were the simplest thing in the universe. "If they start adapting, we just throw more chaos their way. Keep them so off balance they'll be dizzy for a week." "No plan survives contact with the enemy," Jax quoted, tapping a few more commands into the console. "But there's a certain joy in watching them try to cope." Brax chuckled. "You're a real romantic, Jax, Shakespeare of the digital age." "Thanks, Brax. I do my best with what little I've got," Jax shot back, the banter a welcome relief from the tension of their situation. In the corner of the room, a console beeped, demanding attention. Vesper glanced at the readout, her eyes narrowing. "Looks like the Zithrans are trying to isolate their networks." "Cut off the infection." Sable smirked, a gleam of challenge in her eye. "Good luck with that. We've already got our tendrils in deep." Jax nodded, fingers flying over the keys. I'm setting up fallback networks. If they cut one line, we'll just reroute through another. Keep them on their toes or their asses, Brax added, grinning. Vesper laughed, a short, harsh burst of sound. Let's make sure it's the latter. I want them so turned around they think their own shadows are rebel spies. It was a bold plan, a reckless plan. But then, those were the only kind of plans they seemed to have anymore. Strip away the bluster and bravado and what was left? Hope, maybe. Stubbornness, definitely. A refusal to go gently into the night, to let the Zithrans roll over them without a fight. As the minutes ticked by, the strategy began to bear fruit. Reports came in from across the swarm, tales of Zithran ships in disarray, of captains issuing contradictory orders, of chaos taking root in the heart of the invaders. For the first time in a long time, Vesper felt a flicker of genuine hope. Maybe, just maybe, they'd found a way to level the playing field. To tip the balance back in their favor, if only for a moment. And sometimes a moment was all it took. Keep at it, she urged her crew, determination stealing her voice. We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got them on the run. Let's see how far we can push it. They worked in concert, the rhythm of their efforts becoming a melody of resistance, a symphony of defiance. It wasn't much, maybe, but it was theirs. And they'd fight tooth and nail to defend it. Incoming message from the Zithrans, Brax announced, eyebrow raised in surprise. Looks like they want to talk. Vesper considered it, weighing the risks. Patch it through. Let's see what they have to say. The screen flickered, resolving into the image of a Zithran officer, his expression a mask of controlled fury. This is Commander Trelk of the Zithran Empire. You have committed acts of war against us. Cease your interference immediately or face annihilation. Vesper folded her arms, unfazed. Oh, Commander Trelk, we've been facing annihilation since the day we were born. You'll have to be more specific. Trelk's eyes narrowed, a muscle ticking in his jaw. You think this is a game, human? You're meddling with forces beyond your comprehension. Vesper shrugged, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. That's what they said about fire, too. Look how that turned out for us. We will not be swayed by your petty tactics, Trelk continued, his voice a cold, clipped blade. Petty, Vesper replied, feigning offense. We prefer to think of them as resourceful. But hey, tomato, tomato. Trelk's expression darkened, a storm gathering behind his eyes. You cannot hope to win against us. Maybe not, Vesper conceded, her tone light as the void. But we can sure as hell make it hurt when you try. The connection severed, leaving an echo of tension in the room. Vesper faced her crew, unyielding resolve etched into her features. Well, that went about as expected. Let's get back to work. With renewed vigor, they dove into the fray, each of them a cog in the chaotic machine of defiance they'd crafted. The odds were long, the stakes impossibly high, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like they were on the offensive. Sable leaned back in her chair, the hint of a smile on her lips. You know, I think we pissed them off. Vesper grinned, feeling the adrenaline course through her veins like wildfire. Good, let's keep it that way. The battle was far from over and the outcome was anything but certain. But as they worked, side by side in the flickering light of the control room, there was one thing they all knew. Win or lose, live or die, they'd face whatever came next together. And sometimes that was enough. The control room was buzzing, the atmosphere thick with the kind of energy that either led to great victory or spectacular disaster. Vesper Quill, who always had a knack for standing at the crossroads of those two options, surveyed her crew with what she hoped was an expression of inspiring confidence, and not the face of someone who just realized she'd bet the farm on the wrong horse. All right, team, she announced, her voice slicing through the chaos like a skewer through appetizers. We're making progress, but now comes the tricky part. It's time to test our little mimetic strategy on some smaller territories. Brax needlepoint, sporting his perpetual smirk that suggested he found everything from impending doom to Vesper's choice in music equally amusing, leaned back in his chair. Smaller territories, huh? You mean the places where the local warlords think they're sitting on the iron throne of space? More like the rusty recliner of questionable authority. Jack's core added, fingers flying over his console as he prepared to deploy the next wave of chaos. But sure, let's poke the hornet's nest and see what happens. Just be ready to run if they don't find the memes as funny as we do. Sable Dane chimed in, her irreverent grin matching the gleam in her eye that promised she'd enjoy watching it all go wrong. Although watching a warlord try to wrap their head around distracted boyfriend could be worth the price of admission. Or the price of our heads, Vesper quipped, her humor as dark as the void they floated in. Either way, let's get this show on the road. Brax, you've got the playlist ready. Brax gave a mock salute, tapping a few keys with theatrical flair. Locked and loaded, boss. Let's see if we can make them laugh themselves into a coup d'etat. Or a conniption, Jax added, unable to resist the setup. Personally, I think a good conniption is underrated in these circles, Vesper nodded. Send it. Let's give them a taste. The screens flickered, numbers and images flashing in a dizzying array of organized chaos. It was all very technical, but boiled down to the basics. They were simply slinging digital mud pies at people who weren't accustomed to anything less than a full-course dinner of propaganda. Moments later, the first reports crept in. Some warlords seemed to take the bait, their territories descending into minor chaos as their carefully curated images were skewered by the sharp prongs of internet humor. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some of the warlords, clearly not amused by their new roles as the galaxy's latest meme stocks, were pushing back. Hard. Looks like Blor Targan didn't get the joke, Sable observed dryly, pointing at a screen where a fleet of small but angry ships was forming. He's coming for us with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer at a tea party. Blor's never been known for his sense of humor, Brax muttered, practically oozing sarcasm. He's the kind of guy who thinks a knock-knock joke is a declaration of war. We'll need to handle this carefully, Vesper said, her mind racing through options that seemed to get less appealing with each second. Last thing we need is a local warlord deciding to unite against us before we even finish our first comedy special. Jax nodded, his expression serious for once. Already setting up some counter memes to throw him off balance. Bit of slapstick with a touch of existential dread. You know, the classics. Just make sure it's enough to keep him busy, Vesper said, feeling the weight of 1,000 what-ifs settling onto her shoulders. We can't afford to lose momentum now. The room held its breath, eyes glued to the screens as Jax's counter-memes deployed. Blor's ships hesitated, some breaking formation as their systems became entangled in a digital web of confusion and amusement. A few more seconds, Jax muttered, mostly to himself as his fingers danced across the keys in a flurry of activity. Come on, you overgrown space slug, take the bait. Finally, it happened. Blor's ships veered off course, the carefully planned attack descending into chaos as his crews struggled to reclaim control from the images and messages now bombarding their systems. Sable chuckled, a sound that suggested she might actually have enjoyed this little dance with disaster. Looks like Blor's going to be busy explaining why his fleet's acting like it's had one too many at the spaceport bar. Brax shook his head, disbelief mingling with admiration. If nothing else, we can say we gave a whole new meaning to the phrase digital warfare. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. A warning klaxon blared, and Vesper snapped her attention back to the broader picture, where the Zithran forces were starting to stir like a nest of particularly annoyed hornets. They're catching on, she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. Zithrans are beginning to isolate our signal. Right on time, Sable noted with a dry smile. I was beginning to think they might actually be as dumb as they look. Let's not count them out just yet, Vesper warned, her mind already plotting their next move. Jax, how's our fallback network looking? Spotty but functional, Jax replied, typing furiously as he worked to stay ahead of the Zithrans' countermeasures. We're one step ahead, but only just. Then let's keep it that way, Vesper ordered, her voice hard as steel. We need to keep applying pressure, even if it's just to buy ourselves some time. The team set to work, each playing their part in the intricate dance of survival they'd somehow stumbled into. It was a game of chess played against an opponent who had all the pieces, while they were working with pawns and duct tape. "Why do I feel like we're playing with fire?" Brax asked, flicking a quick glance at Vesper. "Because we are," she replied, a wry smile curling her lips. "But sometimes you have to light a few fires to burn down the house." As they continued their efforts, the stakes became clear. The Zithrans were realizing something was amiss, and their attempts to clamp down on the chaos were becoming more coordinated. It was a race against time, and while Vesper didn't mind a good contest, she usually preferred the kind with lower odds of catastrophic failure. "Incoming message from the Zithrans," Brax announced, his eyes flicking over the console. "They're demanding to know what the hell we think we're doing." Vesper leaned back in her chair, feigning a calm she didn't quite feel. "Patch them through. Time to see if we can bluff our way out of this mess." The screen blinked, resolving into a hologram of another Zithran officer, this one with a face like a particularly constipated bulldog. "This is Commander Schur of the Zithran Imperial Fleet," the hologram intoned, his voice vibrating with barely contained fury. "Your actions have endangered the stability of this system. Cease your interference immediately." Vesper tilted her head, regarding the commander with the air of someone considering a particularly tiresome task. "Commander Schur, you say? Nice to meet you. I'm Vesper, and we've been facing stability issues long before you showed up." "You are meddling in affairs far beyond your comprehension," Schur continued, undeterred by her flippant tone. "Your crude attempts at disruption will not stand." "Crude," Vesper replied, her voice laced with mock offense. "We prefer to think of it as unrefined charm. You should try it sometime." Schur's expression darkened, a storm brewing in the depths of his eyes. "This is your final warning. Cease your activities or face the full might of the Zithran Empire." "Now there's a tempting offer," Vesper remarked, her words dripping with sarcasm. "But I'm afraid we're going to have to pass. We've got a busy schedule of not getting conquered to keep." With that, she cut the connection, turning to face her crew with the kind of defiance that had become second nature. "All right, folks, they've put their cards on the table. Time for us to double down." The control room erupted into action, each member of the team throwing themselves into the fray with a grim determination that bordered on the reckless. At this point, Vesper mused, reckless was about all they had left. "Think they'll back off?" Sable asked, her voice tinged with a hope she couldn't quite mask. "Doubt it," Vesper replied, her eyes locked on the screens. "But that doesn't mean we won't make them regret underestimating us." They worked in concert, their efforts a chaotic dance of defiance against the looming threat of the Zithran Empire. It was a gamble, a high-stakes game where the only certainty was that they would either emerge victorious or go down in flames. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew palpable. But beneath it all there was a flicker of something else, a spark that suggested that even against the odds they might just pull this off. "Incoming transmission," Brax announced, a note of surprise in his voice. "This one's not from the Zithrans." Vesper raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "Put it on screen. Let's see what the universe has thrown at us now." The image that resolved on the screen was one of a grizzled old warlord, his face a roadmap of scars and stories better left untold. "This is General Kern of the Free Territories." Vesper leaned forward, interest sharpening her gaze. "General Kern, to what do we owe the pleasure?" Kern's lips twisted into a wry smile, the kind that suggested he'd seen it all and then some. "Word spreading about your little performance with the Zithrans. Some of us think you might just have what it takes to tip the scales." "And what do you think?" Vesper asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I think," Kern replied, his tone carrying the weight of 1,000 battles, "that if you're willing to play the game, you might find yourself some unexpected allies." Vesper exchanged a glance with her team, the silent question hanging in the air. Allies, that could change everything. She turned back to the screen, steeling herself for what was sure to be a leap into the unknown. "All right, General, we're in. Let's see how far we can push this." And with that, the game was on. The stakes were higher, the risks greater, but for the first time they weren't facing it alone. It wasn't much, maybe, but it was a start. And sometimes that was enough. The control room had the frantic energy of a toddler on a sugar rush, and Vesper Quill was its harried babysitter. Screens flickered with endless streams of data. Wires snaked across the floor like tripping hazards sent by the universe as a cosmic joke, and the hum of machinery was a constant reminder that they were one power failure away from flaming doom. "All right, crew, listen up." Vesper's voice cut through the chaos like a particularly sharp knife through overly optimistic cake. "The Zithrans have decided to up the ante. They're sending in their special forces, the Cerebral Guards." Brack's needlepoint looked up from his station, his smirk firmly in place. "Cerebral Guards, eh? Sounds like they finally figured out they are the brainless ones." Jack's core, who was elbow-deep in code and caffeinated optimism, quipped without looking up, "I'd bet their special training involves advanced techniques in eyebrow articulation and smug superiority." Sable Dane leaned back in her chair, her irreverent grin making an appearance. "I bet their recruitment slogan is, 'Join us, we have the best resting bitch face in the galaxy.'" Vesper chuckled, but it was a hollow sound. "As funny as that is, we've got a problem. These guys are the real deal, and they've got a reputation for dismantling operations like ours. So what's the plan, boss?" Brax asked, leaning forward, his smirk replaced by a mask of seriousness. Well, as serious as Brax could get, which was about as serious as a cat playing piano. "We adapt," Vesper replied, the wheels in her mind turning so fast she was surprised nobody could hear them screeching. "Jax, I need you to work on a new memetic algorithm, something that can slip past their defenses undetected." Jax nodded, fingers tapping away at his console. "I'll see what I can cobble together. Maybe something with a bit more substance than the last joke. And while he's working on that piece of digital art," Vesper continued, "Brax, Sable, we need intel. We're going to infiltrate one of their data hubs and get the information we need to stay 2 steps ahead." "Infiltration, huh?" Sable said, her grin widening. "Sounds like a vacation compared to our usual routine." "Yeah, because nothing screams relaxation like sneaking past enemy lines," Brax added, sarcasm dripping from his words like honey from a comb. Vesper rolled her eyes, but the banter did wonders for keeping the nerves at bay. "We move tonight. Get ready." The Iors until the mission ticked by with the sluggishness of a hangover. The crew made their preparations, trading jabs and gallows humor as they geared up for what was undoubtedly a foolhardy venture. The plan was simple in the way dismantling a bomb was simple. Get in, obtain the intel, and get out before the Cerebral Guards could turn them into interstellar roadkill. The Dyson swarm was a labyrinthine mess of corridors, rooms, and dead ends. If you weren't careful, you'd end up wandering for Iors, or worse, stumble into a nest of warlords who valued privacy almost as much as they valued holding grudges. Brax and Sable moved through the shadows like wraiths, their presence unnoticed by the few guards who were more interested in their poker game than in actual security duties. Sable glanced at Brax as they approached the target entry point. "You know, if this doesn't work out, we could always join the Zithran circus. I'm sure they need a couple of clowns." "Speak for yourself," Brax whispered back, a grin on his face. "I'd make a great ringmaster. You, though, definitely the clown." "Har har," she whispered back, feigning offense as she keyed in the bypass code that Jax had set up. The door slid open with a whoosh that was far too loud for comfort, but they slipped inside before anyone could notice. The data hub was a small room, filled with blinking lights and screens, a technological shrine to the gods of information overload. "All right, we're in," Brax said, pulling out the portable data scrambler. "Let's make this quick." Sable tapped into the mainframe with practiced ease, her fingers a blur over the keyboard, downloading the files now and planting a few surprises of our own. Brax glanced over, curiosity piqued. "Surprises? Just a little something to keep them on their toes. Like digital whoopee cushions," Sable replied with a mischievous wink. Brax chuckled, shaking his head. Always the prankster. Hey, if they're going to hunt us down, might as well make it memorable, Sable shot back as the progress bar ticked closer to completion. And done. They slipped out as quietly as they'd come in, the data their prize, and the cerebral guards none the wiser. For now, anyway. Back in the control room, Jax was waiting, his face set in a rare expression of focus that belied his usual carefree demeanor. "How'd it go?" he asked as they entered. "We got what we needed," Sable replied, handing over the data drive, "and left them a little something to remember us by." Jax grinned, a wicked gleam in his eye. "Can't wait to see what kind of chaos that stirs up." Vesper took the drive, plugging it into the main console as she surveyed the room. "Excellent work, everyone. Now we just need to figure out how to use this against the Zithrans. And keep the cerebral guards busy thinking they're chasing ghosts," Brax added, leaning against his station. Vesper studied the data on the screen, piecing together the information that would hopefully give them an edge. "If we can exploit their weaknesses, we might just be able to pull off a miracle. And if not?" Jax asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Vesper turned, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "Then we go down fighting, but damned if we don't make it one hell of a show." Ior's turned into days, each passing moment bringing them closer to the inevitable showdown with the Zithran Empire. The control room was a hive of activity, the team working tirelessly to prepare for the coming storm. Brax leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms above his head. "You know, there's a small part of me that thinks we might actually pull this off. There's a small part of you that still believes in Santa Claus, too," Sable retorted, though her smile took the sting out of her words. "Hey now, I've seen the presents," Brax shot back, feigning indignation. Vesper couldn't help but chuckle at their antics. "Regardless of mythical gift-givers, we've got a real present here," she said, tapping the console. "With this information, we might just be able to outmaneuver the Zithrans. And if we can't?" Jax asked, a teasing lilt to his voice. "Does that mean I get to blow something up?" "Only if it's absolutely necessary," Vesper replied with a mock sigh. "Let's try to keep the collateral damage to a minimum." The atmosphere lightened, their banter a balm for the tension that hummed beneath the surface. But as the day wore on, the reality of their situation settled over them like a heavy cloak. The cerebral guards were no joke, and the Zithran Empire was a force to be reckoned with. But they had something the Zithrans didn't, a crew that was as unpredictable as they were resourceful. As they prepared for the next phase of their plan, Vesper allowed herself a moment of reflection, her thoughts a whirlwind of what-ifs and maybes. This was it, the point of no return. She turned to her team, her voice steady and sure. "All right, folks. Let's show the galaxy what we're made of." With that, they launched into action, a flurry of movement and determination as they set the stage for what would undoubtedly be their greatest performance yet. They didn't know what awaited them on the other side of this battle, but they did know one thing: come hell or high water, they'd face it together, with all the wit and irreverence they could muster. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out of it alive. The control room was a symphony of chaos, each person an instrument playing their own frantic tune. Vesper Quill was the conductor, but it felt more like she was wrangling a herd of cats with a stick made of spaghetti. The screens blinked like a swarm of confused fireflies, and all she wanted was to squish them with a well-aimed fly swatter. "Okay, team," Vesper announced, trying to sound more confident than a cat on a hot tin roof. "Let's get this wrapped up before the cerebral guards find us." "About that," said Brax Needlepoint, his usual smirk replaced by something that looked suspiciously like worry. "Jax is missing." The statement fell into the room like a grenade, and everyone stopped as if awaiting the boom. "Missing?" Vesper echoed, her voice an octave higher than usual. "As in not here, or missing as in he's taken another coffee break without bringing any for the rest of us?" "Neither," Brax said, his face unusually serious. "He went to check the algorithm on the outer hull and he's just gone. No comms, nothing." Vesper's mind did a somersault and landed on its back, winded. Jax was their coder, the caffeinated heart of their operation. Without him, their plan was as good as a ship with a hole in its hull. "Damn it," she muttered, rubbing her temples. "Could this get any worse?" "Not unless you find out your ship's been repossessed," Sable Dane offered helpfully, her irreverent grin doing nothing to lighten the mood. "Thanks, Sable," Vesper said dryly. Just what I needed, more existential dread. They had to find Jax and fast, but even if they did, the clock was ticking and time was a luxury they couldn't afford. "All right," Vesper continued, her voice as steady as she could manage. "We need to split up. Sable, Brax, I want you to comb the ship. If Jax is still aboard, you need to find him. And if he's not," Brax asked, though they all knew the answer. "Then we pray the Zithrans have a sudden and inexplicable change of heart. Like they grow one," Sable chimed in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Exactly," Vesper replied, not missing a beat. "Now move." As Brax and Sable left to scour the ship, Vesper returned to the chaos of the control room, her mind racing faster than a ship in hyperdrive. She slammed her fist against the console, frustration washing over her like acid rain. "Jax, you idiot," she muttered to herself. "Getting yourself caught was not part of the plan. No one knew better than Vesper that plans were like dreams. They rarely survived contact with reality. But losing Jax, that was a nightmare she hadn't accounted for." Iors dragged by like they had lead in their pockets, each minute marked by the oppressive silence of the unknown. The screens continued their mindless blinks, a reminder of all the things going wrong. The door slid open with a hiss and Brax and Sable shuffled in, their expressions grim. "Anything?" Vesper asked, though she already knew the answer. Brax shook his head. "Nada. It's like he vanished into thin air, or got snatched by the cerebral guards," Sable muttered, folding her arms. "Those bastards are probably interrogating him as we speak." The thought was a punch to the gut. Jax, with his boundless optimism and infectious energy, facing the steely, calculating cerebral guards. It was like sending a puppy into a den of wolves. "We're screwed," Brax said, collapsing into a chair with all the grace of a deflated balloon. "Without Jax, we're dead in the water." "Not necessarily," Vesper said, though the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. "We can still—" "Still what?" Brax interrupted, frustration bleeding into his voice. "We've got nothing. The Zithrans are closing in, and without Jax, our mimetic strategy's shot." Vesper opened her mouth to protest but found she had no words. They'd laughed in the face of danger, taunted the Grim Reaper himself, but this felt like staring down the barrel of a loaded gun, a gun held by an impatient, trigger-happy maniac. "We could try contacting the warlords," Sable suggested, though her tone suggested she wasn't holding out much hope. "Maybe we can rally some support." "The warlords," Vesper echoed, incredulous. "The same warlords who think diplomacy involves a bigger gun." "Just a thought," Sable said with a shrug. "Desperate times and all that." Brax perked up suddenly, his eyes alight with a spark of mischief. "Or we could. I don't know, use memes to confuse the hell out of them. I mean, distracted boyfriend could still save the day." Sable snorted. "Yeah, because when I think high-stakes military operation, I immediately think internet memes." Vesper sighed, the weight of their situation pressing down on her like a star gone supernova. "We need a plan B, and we need it fast." The mood in the room was as low as a snake's belly in a ditch, and Vesper could feel it sucking the fight out of them. They were standing on the precipice, and it felt like the edge was crumbling beneath their feet. "What about the intel we grabbed?" Brax asked tentatively. "Maybe there's something in there that could give us a leg up." Vesper nodded slowly, clinging to the sliver of hope like a lifeline. "We'll go through it again. Maybe there's something we missed, like an instruction manual for dealing with Zithrans," Sable quipped, though her heart clearly wasn't in it. "Hey, if it comes with pictures, I'm game," Brax replied, trying for levity but landing somewhere closer to desperation. The next few hours were spent poring over the data they'd risked life and limb to obtain, searching for anything that might turn the tide in their favor. But the clock was ticking, and their options were dwindling faster than a gambler's luck. As the last of the information scrolled across the screen, Vesper leaned back, exhaustion tugging at her like a persistent child. There was nothing. No magic bullet, no Deus ex machina. Just cold, hard reality staring back at them. "We're out of time," she said finally, the words a bitter pill to swallow. "Then what do we do now?" Brax asked, his voice laced with a quiet resignation that cut deeper than any blade. "We stick to the plan," Vesper replied, though the conviction had all the solidity of a puff of smoke. "We do what we can and we pray that somewhere out there luck decides to cut us a break." "And if it doesn't?" Sable asked, her gaze steady despite the turmoil swirling around them. "Then we go down swinging," Vesper said, a fierce determination flaring to life within her. "And we make sure the Zithrans never forget the day they crossed us. They were up against the wall, outgunned and outmaneuvered. But they were still here, still fighting, still refusing to go quietly into that good night. And maybe that was enough." The mood was somber as they prepared to face the music, each member of the team confronting their own demons, their own fears. But in the silence there was a shared understanding, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. They were more than a crew. They were a family. With the echoes of the past still ringing in her ears, Vesper turned to her team, the people who'd followed her into hell without a second thought. "All right, folks," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Let's show these Zithran bastards what we're made of." A chorus of affirmatives greeted her, a rallying cry in the face of insurmountable odds. They might have been battered and bruised, but their spirit was unbroken. And as they prepared to face their fate, Vesper allowed herself a moment to hope that, just maybe, they'd come through this stronger than before. The final act was about to begin, and come hell or high water, they'd make damn sure it was one for the history books. And if they went down, it would be in a blaze of glory that would light up the galaxy. "To hell and back," Brax said, raising an imaginary glass in a mock toast. "To us," Vesper replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "The galaxy's most dysfunctional family." And with that they turned their gaze to the stars, ready to face whatever fate had in store for them. They might have been on the edge of oblivion, but if there was one thing they knew for certain, it was this: they'd go out fighting with all the humor and irreverence they could muster. And maybe, just maybe, that would be their saving grace. Vesper Quill stood before the flickering chaos of the control room, feeling like the captain of a sinking ship. Somewhere out there, Jax was missing, and the Zithran Empire's special forces were closing in with all the subtlety of a chainsaw in a library. Sable Dane, as irreverent as ever, leaned against the console, her grin a cocktail of mischief and madness. "So, Captain, got any bright ideas before we become space dust?" "Yeah." "Sable," Vesper replied, rubbing the back of her neck like it might dispense answers. "We're going to find Jax, rally the team, and slap the Empire with the best damn meme they've ever seen. Because nothing says screw you like a viral meme," Sable said with a chuckle, the sound as dry as a Martian desert. "What's the plan, then?" "We're going on a little rescue mission," Vesper said, glancing at Brax Needlepoint, who was busy pretending he wasn't listening. "Brax, you got those ship schematics we swiped? Do I look like a filing cabinet?" Brax grumbled, digging through a pile of digital debris. "But yeah, somewhere in this mess." "Here." He tossed a data pad at Vesper, who caught it with only a slight fumble, proving that adrenaline was good for something. "All right," Vesper said, scanning the pad. Jax was working on the outer hull when he disappeared. Chances are he's still out there playing hide and seek with death. Or the cerebral guards got to him, Brax pointed out, his smirk returning like an old friend. "They're not exactly known for their hospitality." "Thanks for the pep talk," Vesper said, her patience as thin as a credit card. "But if they've got Jax, we're going to get him back. And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Sable asked, her eyebrow arching higher than the stakes. "With style," Vesper said, grinning despite herself. "And maybe a little help from our friends." "You mean the warlords?" Brax asked, incredulous. "They're about as trustworthy as a snake oil salesman at a truth convention." "Desperate times," Vesper replied, her grin only widening. "Besides, I have a feeling they'll be very interested in what we've got cooking. With a plan that was both half-baked and dangerously brilliant, they set out to rescue Jax. The ship's corridors stretched out before them like the jagged teeth of a hungry beast, but Vesper was undeterred. She'd led her crew through hell before. What was a little stroll through peril? As they made their way to the airlock, the weight of the mission settled over them like an unwanted guest at a party. Vesper's thoughts wandered to the memetic algorithm they'd been working on, Jax's brainchild, a weapon of confusion aimed squarely at the heart of the Empire. It was a long shot, but in their line of work, long shots were often all they had. The airlock loomed ahead, and Vesper keyed in the sequence with fingers that were steadier than she felt. The door hissed open, revealing the cold void beyond. Space wasn't forgiving, but neither was Vesper Quill. Sable clamped her helmet in place, giving a thumbs-up that was as reassuring as a pat on the back from a gorilla. Let's go bring back our boy Genius. The transition from ship to stars was as jarring as ever, a sudden plunge into silence interrupted only by the sound of their breathing and the wild thumping of Vesper's heart. The outer hull stretched before them, a vast expanse of metal and starlight. Keep your eyes peeled, Vesper instructed, scanning the horizon for any sign of Jax or his captors. He's out here somewhere, assuming he hasn't gone for an impromptu spacewalk, Sable quipped, her voice crackling through the comms. A flash of movement caught Vesper's eye, and she turned sharply, adrenaline spiking like a bad drug trip. It was Jax, tethered to a section of hull that might as well have been a world away. Relief flooded through her, followed swiftly by irritation. There he is, Vesper said, nodding in his direction. Let's get him home. As they maneuvered closer, she could see Jax frantically waving, his gestures a mixture of excitement and sheer terror. He was alive, and he had something to say. Vesper keyed her comms. Jax, what the hell happened, Vesper? Jax's voice came through like he'd been holding his breath for years. You won't believe it. I've cracked it. The algorithm, it works. Well, color me surprised, Sable muttered. We'll celebrate after we're not in mortal danger. We've got company, Brax noted, pointing out the silhouette of a Zithran ship creeping into view like a bad omen. Vesper grimaced. Time's up. Let's move. They reached Jax in record time, securing his tether and pulling him back with a speed that defied logic. Jax was breathless and babbling, but there was a spark in his eyes that Vesper hadn't seen in a long time. You wouldn't believe what I had to do to get the Zithrans off my tail, Jax said, sliding into the airlock with a mixture of relief and triumph. They've got a blind spot, literally. I slipped right through. Vesper's mind raced as the airlock cycled, the hiss of repressurization a welcome sound. You've got a plan, don't you? Jax grinned, the kind of grin that promised trouble. We make the meme go viral. But not just any meme, the distracted boyfriend with a twist. It'll spread faster than a cold on a colony ship, and you're sure it'll work? Brax asked, skeptical as ever. Sure as I am that you never returned my favorite wrench, Jax shot back, earning a half-hearted glare from Brax. All right, Vesper said, her mind picking up speed. Let's get back to the control room and make some magic. The journey back was a blur of adrenaline and anticipation, Vesper's mind already spinning with the possibilities. Jax had given them a shot, one last, desperate gambit against the encroaching darkness. As they burst into the control room, the tension was palpable, each member of the team on edge, ready to act. Vesper took her place at the helm, the screens around her coming to life in a chaotic dance of light and data. Jax, you're up, she said, stepping aside so he could work his magic. Jax's fingers flew over the console, a pattern only he could decipher. Lines of code appeared like a symphony in chaos, each keystroke a declaration of war against the Empire's grip. It was the kind of coding that bordered on art, and Vesper found herself holding her breath as she watched. Finally, Jax leaned back, a satisfied grin stretching across his face. And done, prepare for a digital storm. Now what? Sable asked, eyeing the screens with a mix of apprehension and hope. Now we wait, Jax said, crossing his arms with a confidence that was infectious. If I've done this right, the Empire's going to have a meme-induced headache the likes of which they've never seen. As the seconds ticked by, The tension in the room coiled like a spring, ready to snap. Vesper's mind flitted between hope and despair, the stakes higher than they'd ever been. Then the first notification flashed on the screen. A low-level Zithran officer, confused, his comms flooded with memes that didn't make sense but somehow felt right. Then another notification and another. It was spreading, a virus of comedy and chaos permeating the Empire's carefully constructed facade. "It's working," Jax exclaimed, punching the air with glee. "They're going viral," Vesper let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Well, damn. Who would have thought our salvation would come in the form of a meme?" Sable laughed, the sound rich and genuine, cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. "Looks like we're not just fighting with guns anymore. More like laughing them to death," Brax added, his smirk returning with a vengeance. The control room erupted into a flurry of activity, each member of the team coordinating to amplify the chaos Jax had unleashed. They were turning the Empire's technology against them, a viral uprising that undermined their authority with every click and share. For the first time in what felt like forever, Vesper allowed herself to believe that they might just have a fighting chance. They were small, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they were also clever, irreverent, and undeniably human. And that, it seemed, was the Empire's greatest weakness. As the meme continued its rampage across the Zithran networks, Vesper turned to her team, a fierce pride swelling within her chest. They'd pulled off the impossible, and it was one hell of a turning point. "All right, team," she said, her voice steady and strong. "Let's keep this momentum going. We've got a galaxy to save. They might have been the galaxy's most dysfunctional family, but they were hers, and together they'd just given the Empire a black eye with a punchline. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem quite so bleak. They were fighting back, and maybe, just maybe, they'd come out on top after all." Vesper leaned back in her chair, the cacophony of the control room a familiar, if not entirely welcome, soundtrack. Around her, screens flared to life with the chaos they'd unleashed upon the Zithran Empire. It was like watching a fireworks display, only the fireworks were memes and the explosions were in the Empire's credibility. "Are we sure this is working?" Sable asked, peering over her shoulder at one of the screens. "I mean, it's a meme. It's not exactly a tactical nuke," "Relax," Jax replied, still riding the high of their digital assault. "This is the future of warfare. Memes are like sleeper agents, harmless until they explode in your face. Like Brax's cooking," Vesper added, earning a chuckle from the crew. Brax shot her a look that was half offense, half agreement. "I warned you about the chili. Besides, this is different. We're not just poking the bear. We're setting its fur on fire." Jax nodded, his fingers still dancing over the console like he was conducting an orchestra of chaos. "The Empire's comms are clogged. Command can't communicate without getting hit with distracted boyfriend and cats in space helmets. It's beautiful, beautiful in a what the hell have we done kind of way," Brax muttered, still skeptical. Skeptical was kind of his thing, but is it enough? Vesper asked, her voice cutting through the banter like a cold blade. "We need to make sure this sticks." Jax's grin widened, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Oh, it'll stick, all right. Think of it like a snowball. Once it gets rolling, it's an avalanche. We've hit their neural networks, their data cores. It's like they're trying to run a marathon with their shoelaces tied together, and you're sure they won't just reset their systems?" Sable asked, a healthy dose of doubt in her tone. "Resetting would mean admitting they've got a problem," Jax explained, shaking his head. "And you know the Zithrans. They'd rather eat nails than admit a human bested them." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of their gamble hanging in the air. It was a bet against the odds, but then, those were the only bets worth taking. "All right," Vesper said finally, her voice steady and full of that reckless hope that had gotten them this far. "Let's push this thing. If they're going to tumble, let's make sure they crash hard." The crew sprang into action, each member moving with the kind of synchronized chaos that looked like a dance at a distance but felt like a brawl up close. Vesper directed the pandemonium, her orders sharp and quick, cutting through the noise like a knife through old synth sheaths. Brax, get those relays going. Make sure our signal's bouncing across every network they've got. I want them seeing memes in their sleep. On it, Cap, Brax replied, diving into the task with a focus that belied his usual cynicism. Sable, keep an eye on their fleet movements. If they start sending ships our way, I want to know before they've finished their pre-flight coffee. Got it, Sable said, her fingers racing across her console. I'll give you a heads up before they even start stretching. And Jax, Vesper continued, turning to her resident tech wizard. Make sure we don't end up frying our own systems in the process. Jax laughed, a sound like shattered glass. Don't worry, V. I've got a firewall so thick, not even my mother could guilt trip through it. Yeah, because she'd be too busy laughing at your memes, Brax quipped, earning a snort from Sable. All right, Vesper said, waving off the banter. Let's focus, people. We're not out of the woods yet. As if to punctuate her point, a new alert flashed across the main screen. A Zithran cruiser breaking formation, its path as erratic as a drunk pilot on leave. Look at that, Sable murmured, half amazed. They are already squabbling like toddlers fighting over the last cookie. That's what happens when the commanding officer's busy trying to decode why a doge is telling them much wow, Jax added with a grin. Disorder in their ranks means momentum for us, Vesper said, her mind racing with possibilities. If we can keep them off balance, we've got a shot at more than just a distraction. And what's the plan? Brax asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it out loud. We hit them where it hurts, Vesper replied, her voice low but charged with determination. We coordinate with the Dyson warlords, those charming bastards, and take advantage of the chaos. If we can topple a few key outposts, the Empire will be too busy trying to save face to notice us slipping through their fingers. Like a grease-coated eel, Sable added, her grin wicked. Exactly, Vesper said, nodding. It's a long shot, but then, when have we ever played it safe? The room hummed with a renewed sense of purpose, each member of the crew hyper-focused on their role in the upcoming assault. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking a swing at the giant and hoping like hell they didn't get squashed in the process. As the minutes ticked by, the tension wound tighter, but Vesper could feel the momentum shifting. The Zithran Empire, a monolithic force of oppression, was wobbling on its foundations, and it was all because some humans had decided to weaponize humor. All right, Brax, how are those relays looking? Vesper asked, her eyes scanning the digital horizon. Brax glanced up from his console, a rare flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. We're live across the board. They're scrambling just to keep their lights on. Good, Vesper replied, her voice steady. Sable, any movement, just the usual panic, Sable reported, her tone almost cheerful. It's like watching ants scatter when you kick their hill. Perfect, Vesper said, her grin sharp. Ready for round two, born ready, Jax answered, his fingers poised over the controls. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget, Vesper declared, her voice a battle cry wrapped in dark humor. As Jax hit the final sequence, the control room erupted in a flurry of activity, each screen lighting up with the digital storm they'd unleashed. It was chaos, beautiful and terrible, and Vesper watched as the Empire's infrastructure buckled under the weight of absurdity. Gods, this is insane, Brax muttered, half disbelieving. Yeah, Sable agreed, her eyes bright with a mix of awe and mischief. And it's going to work. Damn right it is, Vesper said, her resolve as unyielding as steel. Let's keep the pressure on. We're not just surviving, we're fighting back. The Iors stretched on, an endless cycle of tension and triumph, until finally the reports began to trickle in. Outposts falling, fleets scattering, commanders too busy laughing or arguing over cats in existential crises to respond effectively. Vesper watched it all unfold, a warrior's pride swelling in her chest as they struck blow after blow against the Empire's iron grip. It was a symphony of chaos, and for the first time in a long time, they were not the ones dancing to the enemy's tune. V, you're not going to believe this, Jax called out, his voice tinged with incredulity. Try me, Vesper replied, her curiosity piqued. There's talk of defection. Some of the Zithran commanders are switching sides. They're done with the Empire's crap. Vesper blinked, processing the information with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Seriously, looks like it, Jax confirmed, his grin as wide as a crescent moon. Turns out they don't like being made fools of any more than we do. Well, who would have thought, Brax remarked, his tone wry. Our memes are doing more diplomatic work than any ambassador ever could. Guess humor really is universal, Sable added, her smile infectious. All right, people, focus, Vesper said, her voice cutting through the banter. We've got momentum, but let's not get complacent. This is our chance to turn the tide. Let's not squander it. With renewed vigor, the crew dived back into their work, each member pushing the limits of their endurance and ingenuity. It was a desperate gambit, but desperation had always been their greatest ally. As the hours ticked by, the reports of chaos and confusion multiplied, each one a testament to their unlikely victory. The Zithran Empire, once thought invincible, was teetering on the brink, its own arrogance and rigidity betraying it at the worst possible moment. All right, team, Vesper said, her voice a blend of exhaustion and determination. The warlords are ready to move. Let's make sure they know exactly where to strike. Brax nodded, already coordinating the final details with a precision that belied his usual laid-back demeanor. They're ready when we are, good, Vesper said, her resolve hardening into steel. Then let's give the galaxy something to talk about. With one last glance at her crew, Vesper set the plan in motion, her heart pounding with the thrill of the fight. It was time to make history, and if they had anything to say about it, they'd be laughing all the way to victory. As the chaos of war unfolded across the stars, Vesper and her crew stood at the helm, orchestrating a symphony of rebellion and irreverence. They were small, flawed, and fiercely human, but in that moment they were also unstoppable. And for the first time in a long time, the future was theirs to shape. The control room felt like a bar after last call, chaotic with a hint of triumph and sticky floors from spilled drinks, or in this case, spilled data. Vesper Quill leaned back in her chair, the well-worn leather creaking under her weight, and surveyed the screens displaying the aftermath of their little memetic blitzkrieg. It was like watching someone try to herd cats, all claws and confusion. Well, if that ain't a sight, Brax Needlepoint said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Looks like the Zithran Empire's had its ego curb-stomped. Jack's core, ever the optimist and caffeinated to the gills, twirled a stylus between his fingers like a skilled card shark. Who knew a well-placed cat meme could have the same effect as a fleet of battleships? Sable Dane, grinning like a Cheshire cat, because why not keep the theme consistent, stretched her arms above her head. And to think they called us primitive. Turns out, all you need to topple an empire is a sense of humor and a willingness to look ridiculous. Vesper chuckled, a dry sound that was more bark than laugh. A lesson in humility for them, a victory lap for us. Her eyes flicked over to the readout on the main screen. Dyson swarms buzzing with excitement. Looks like the local warlords have finally decided to play nice now that there's something in it for them. Brax snorted, tapping away at his data pad. Oh, sure. The Iron Throne of Space or the rusty recliner of questionable authority. Nothing brings folks together like a common enemy or a mutually beneficial opportunity. He paused, frowning at the screen. Even if it means sitting next to someone who stabbed your cousin last Tuesday. Family, Jax quipped, shaking his head. Can't live with him, can't space him without a court-martial. The room erupted into laughter, the kind that came from shared hardship and a victory hard won. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time it felt possible. The Zithran Empire was on its back foot, and the Dyson swarm was uniting against a common foe, even if their unity was as stable as a drunk standing on one leg. All right, folks, Vesper said, bringing them back to the here and now. We've got the upper hand, but let's not get cocky. We need to keep the pressure on while the Zithrans are busy licking their wounds. Sable nodded, her fingers flying across her console. Already on it. We're tracking their fleet movements and it looks like they're pulling back, probably to regroup or figure out which end of their armor the bullet came from. Good, Vesper replied, her tone now all business. Brax, I want you to double-check our comms with the Dyson warlords. Make sure they're not planning any double crosses once the dust settles. Brax gave a thumbs up, already diving into the schematics like a kid in a candy store. If they try, they'll find themselves in a world of hurt, and not the fun kind. And Jax, Vesper continued, her gaze shifting to their resident tech wizard. Keep an eye on the Empire's chatter. If there's any hint of the cerebral guards regrouping, I want to know about it before they even think about heading our way. Jax saluted with his stylus, a lopsided grin on his face. You got it, Cap. If they so much as sneeze, we'll know. The crew fell back into their rhythm, that familiar dance of orchestrating chaos with all the finesse of a bull in a china shop. For all their banter and irreverence, they were good at what they did, damn good. It was what had kept them alive this long and what would, hopefully, get them through this mess. As the hours ticked by, reports trickled in like drips from a faulty faucet. The Dyson swarm was stabilizing, leadership emerging from the fog of war. It was like watching a bunch of alley cats decide to play nice because the local dog was finally on a leash. Hey, V, Sable called out, her voice carrying over the hum of electronics. Looks like the cerebral guards are still licking their wounds. No sign of them forming up for a counterattack. Vesper allowed herself a moment of relief. Good. Gives us breathing room to set up defenses and reinforce our foothold. Jax leaned back in his chair, stretching like a cat who'd just gotten into the cream. You know, we might just pull this off without getting ourselves turned into space dust. Brax grinned, a wicked gleam in his eye. And here I thought I'd die of boredom, not glorious combat. The banter flowed easy, a sign that maybe, just maybe, things were looking up. But Vesper knew better than to count her chickens before they hatched, or in this case, before they were vaporized by a stray laser blast. Don't jinx it, she said, though her tone was more amused than stern. We've still got a long way to go before we can call this a win. But when we do, Sable added, her grin infectious, we're going to throw the mother of all parties. I'm talking zero-G dancing, synthale for days and maybe even a karaoke session. Jax snorted. You trying to kill us faster than the Zithrans? I've heard you sing, Sable. I'd rather face down a cerebral guard. Hey, my singing's a weapon, Sable shot back, laughter in her voice. Just not the kind you want to use unless you're really desperate. The control room was alive with energy, the kind that came from half insanity and half desperation. And yet, beneath it all, there was a thread of hope, fragile but growing stronger with each passing hour. Vesper leaned back, letting the chatter wash over her. There was still work to be done, still battles to fight, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like they had a chance. A real chance to carve out a future where they weren't just surviving but thriving. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was reckless. But if there was one thing Vesper had learned, it was that sometimes you had to be a little bit of both to make it in this universe. The reports from the Dyson swarm continued to roll in, each one a testament. No, strike that, a reminder of how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. But for now, it was enough. They'd taken a swing at the giant and come out swinging, and in a galaxy where survival was the only victory that mattered, that was something worth celebrating. All right, folks, Vesper said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. Let's wrap this up. We've got a galaxy to save, and I'd rather not do it with a hangover. The crew snapped back to attention, the banter fading as they returned to the task at hand. They were a ragtag bunch, as irreverent as they were skilled, but in a universe teetering on the edge of chaos, they were exactly what was needed. As the hours passed, the Dyson swarm began to stabilize, the various factions coming together under a new cooperative leadership. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was progress. It was a start. Vesper watched it all unfold, a mixture of pride and disbelief in her chest. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd done it. "So, V," Sable said, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. "What now? We've poked the bear and lived to tell the tale." Vesper considered the question, a smile tugging at her lips. Now we keep going. We keep fighting, keep pushing, and maybe, just maybe, we make this galaxy a little bit better, one meme at a time." The room erupted into laughter, the kind that came from shared victory and the knowledge that they'd done something truly remarkable. They'd taken on an empire and come out on top, not with guns or ships, but with creativity and a stubborn refusal to back down. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, it was enough. As the crew settled back into their routines, Vesper allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. They were a motley crew, as flawed as they were ingenious, but they were hers. And together, they'd changed the game. "All right, team," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Let's get to work. There's still a galaxy out there, and it's not going to save itself." With that, they returned to their consoles, ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, the future was theirs to shape. And as Vesper looked out at the stars, she knew one thing for certain: they were just getting started.